In this lecture, we will review some basic principles of animal rights. We will begin with some history. In the 1960s, two events helped to generate the environmental movement and philosophy that we have today. In 1962, Rachel Carson published her book, Silent Spring, which gave a chilling account of how widespread use of DDTs, a colorless, tasteless, and almost odorless insecticide, was decimating bird populations. Although she was vilified by pesticide manufacturers and some scientists, she was able to witness a start of environmental activism as a result of her book before she died of cancer in 1964. The second event occurred in the span of years between 1965 and 1968. The Sierra Club, an environmental organization in the U.S., founded by a seminal American conservationist and preservationist, John Muir, led a national campaign against a proposal to dam the Colorado River inside Grand Canyon National Park. The organization took out full-page advertisements in the New York Times and other major periodicals in which they lambasted the proposed Grand Canyon Dam. Responding to the suggestion that a 600-foot deep lake would bring tourists closer to the Grand Canyon's rocky walls, one advertisement retorted, quote, "Should we also flood the Sistine Chapel so tourists can get nearer the ceiling?" End quote. Although these efforts caused the organization to lose its tax-exempt status, they were ultimately successful. By 1968, public opinion forced the federal government to abandon the dam project. Silent Spring and the Sierra Club campaign helped to shape some of the key ideas of modern environmental philosophy. In Silent Spring, Carson demonstrated that human efforts to control nature, like insects, often have unanticipated and costly consequences, including damage to human health and other blameless life forms, like birds. In this way, she not only challenged the anthropocentric assumption that nature is merely a stockpile of resources for human benefit, but encouraged people to frame environmentally destructive forces as morally wrong. This is different from other environmental views that saw such anthropocentrism as merely wasteful and imprudent. Carson is also responsible for establishing grounds for an alliance between animal liberationists and environmentalists. Let's clarify this last point. Historically, animal liberation and environmental ethics have been conflated. Even today, although a schism has developed between the two, the lay perspective is that the two are pretty much the same. And understandably so. We humans are large vertebrates ourselves and find easy comparisons with other large vertebrates like elephants, primates, and dolphins in the natural environment. The tension between animal liberation movements and environmental ethics, then, lies with the way the animal liberation movements often give preference to animals, often mammals, like domestic cattle and sheep, feral rabbits, goats, pigs, and the like, even if such preference causes further ecological degradation and erosion of biodiversity. As a case in point, today there is an ongoing debate between groups defending the rights of feral cats and ornithologists, or scientists who study birds. Those defending the rights of feral cats are of the animal liberation and rights movement end of the environmental spectrum. Meanwhile, the ornithologists are on the environmental ethics end of the environmental spectrum. When feral cat populations become high in a certain area, ornithologists will often argue for the immediate and wide-reaching extermination of the outdoor feline population in order to protect the bird populations which are otherwise caused serious harm. On the other hand, defenders of feral cat populations would instead demand humane alternatives for maintaining and reducing outdoor feline populations over a period of time, including, for example, sterilization via spaying and neutering. In this way, the animal rights supporters would recognize the need to reduce the feline population, while also allowing already live outdoor felines to keep on with their lives. Such an endeavor, from the environmental ethics perspective, however, can facilitate further degradation of biodiversity. The conflict between these two environmental approaches has made its way into popular media. In the third season of Futurama, an animated sci-fi television series, we see that an unnaturally accelerated penguin reproduction rate has led to overpopulation, and in response, an animal rights movement has paradoxically taken on an environmental ethics approach to drastically reducing the population and ensuring that the penguins do not starve.
Folks, it's worse than we thought. Seems dark matter is nature's sex drug. It's like a perverted trail mix of penguin estrogen, penguin Viagra, and Spanish penguin fly. Why, it's making them ultra-fertile.
How ultra?
Well, your garden variety penguin lays 1 egg a year. Since the spill, our penguins have been laying 6 eggs every 15 minutes. Also, the eggs hatch in only 12 hours. Also, the males are laying eggs.
This man is overgasped.
If the birds keep multiplying, there'll soon be too many to count. Before long, the penguins will exhaust their food supply and starve to death.
Oh, if only we hadn't flown penguins to Pluto and dumped oil on them, this might never have happened. Can't we stop them from multiplying?
Yes, I reckon it is our responsibility. And thankfully, we have a plan.
What is it? We'll do anything.
Everyone, grab your guns. I declare penguin hunting season officially open.
In this clip, Futurama highlights the apparent contradictions of the animal rights movement and environmental ethics approach, but animal liberation has long been the butt of criticism and jokes. In the beginning, the idea was that there is a hierarchy of intelligence, self-awareness, or some other apparent unique characteristic that suggests that the superiority of humans to animals is simply self-evident. However, the importance of any and all liberation movements is, as stated by Peter Singer, the groundbreaking author of Animal Liberation, quote, "A liberation movement demands an expansion of our moral horizons, and an extension or reinterpretation of the basic moral principles of equality. Who can say with confidence that all his or her attitudes and practices are beyond criticism? If we wish to avoid being numbered amongst the oppressors, we must be prepared to rethink even our most fundamental attitudes. In other words, we should always assume we possess latent prejudices, and we should strive to forcefully point them out. If animal rights sounds ridiculous to us now, consider for instance that it used to be that women's liberation movements were also ridiculed just a century ago. In fact, women used to be compared to animals, and the women's liberation movement in the 19th century was ridiculed as a self-evident joke. When Mary Wollstonecraft, a late 18th century proto-feminist, published her book Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792, a distinguished Cambridge philosopher, Thomas Taylor, satirized the work by then publishing his own work titled A Vindication of the Rights of Brutes. Thus, according to Peter Singer, author of Animal Liberation, we should strive to become aware of our latent prejudices. This doesn't mean we can't ask questions. Animal liberation and rights movements typically call for basic principles of equality to be applied to all species, just as we would apply basic principles of equality to all members of our own species. However, one of the first questions people ask when faced with animal liberation and rights movements is, what do we mean by basic principles of equality? It wouldn't do much good, for instance, to give a pig the right to vote or to bear arms. Thus, there are simply difficulties in conferring animals with all the legal rights humans have. In current law, almost all animals are considered things or property. They have some protections against unjustified and unnecessary harm, but lack the power, such as the power to sue, in order to protect themselves from such unjustified harm. Animal rights then demands more than the welfare of animals. That is, while welfarists advocate increased penalties on unjustifiable harsh treatment of animals, they accept the legal status of other species as property, and in some cases reaffirm humankind's superiority over other species. In contrast, rights advocates seek personhood for animals. Under such a concept as personhood, animals would have certain inalienable rights, such as the right to life, liberty, and happiness. Under such a concept, animals would have interests that can be protected. For instance, animal personhood would demand that people not eat animals, just as they would not eat humans. Animal personhood would demand that people not experiment on animals, just as they would not experiment on humans. And animal personhood would demand that people not own animals, just as they would not own other humans. The second question one might ask is who or what exactly should be conferred the rights of equality. Jeremy Bentham, the founder of the philosophy of utilitarianism, responds to this last question by arguing that ethics should be based on their effects. Referring even to slaves who were in his time considered animals, Bentham reasoned that, quote, each to count for one, and none for more than one, end quote. That is, that everyone's interests count, and no single interest counts for more or less than anyone else's. In this way, it doesn't matter how intelligent one is or how well one can articulate its thoughts, rather it matters how one's actions affect others. The question in the end, then, is, as Jeremy Bentham clarified, can the thing in question suffer? It is the capacity for suffering which gives a being the right to equal consideration. Thus, in terms of liberation and rights, it is common for people to point to sentience as the basic requirement for equality. If a being suffers, Bentham argues, there can be no moral justification for refusing to take its suffering into consideration. For no matter how intelligent or articulate the being is, it suffers as we do. 4 or 5 hens stuffed into a single cage with wire floors suffer. A rock kicked down a road does not. And this allows us to determine who or what should be conferred the rights of equality. Finally, after asking what equality is and who or what deserves equality, one might ask of the animal liberation and rights movements, why? That is, why is it wrong to treat other beings that can suffer as unequal? On one hand, this question can be rephrased as why is it wrong to be cruel, whereas cruel takes on a very particular Lockean definition. In this Lockean definition of cruelty, some argue that one must take pleasure in the pain they cause others for it to be considered cruel or wrong. In this case, it is not wrong to cause necessary pain. Take a look at this Futurama episode. Like the earlier one, it demonstrates the contradictions such environmental arguments can imply.
Stop shooting! It's me, Leela.
Sorry.
Why aren't you firing randomly into those birds, little lady? Don't you want to help them?
Not this way.
What? Why, you're not a tree-hugging kook at all.
Look, I don't know if shooting penguins will help the environment or not, but I do know the decision shouldn't be in the hands of people who just want to kill for fun.
Leela, you may just be farming some free-range truth there. On the other hand, we already made up 200 pounds of batter for penguin tempura. Okay, boys, it's them or us.
No!
The point is, with the Lockean definition of cruelty, one is either an evil or good person, rather than a person committing moral or immoral acts. And people can easily excuse themselves from charges of cruelty by simply saying they found no pleasure in causing suffering, or by saying that the suffering was necessary. And this takes us to the flaw in a utilitarian approach. As mentioned earlier, Bentham's utilitarian approach suggests that everyone's interests count, and no one interest counts for more or less than anyone else's interests. However, this introduces an equation that also allows for the sum total of good and bad effects to determine the value of interests. For instance, with a utilitarian approach, one can kill for food, scientific experimentation, and ecological stability, as long as the act serves the good of more beings than the one who suffers. With a utilitarian approach, one could easily argue that it is not wrong to harm other sentient animals as long as their use outweighs their suffering, and the group interests outweigh the individual interests. At this point, we still do not have an adequate answer to the question, why is it wrong to treat other beings that can suffer as unequal? Do animals have the right not to be harmed? Tom Regan gives us one possible answer. Regan is a specialist in animal rights, and what he argues is that if humans have rights not to be harmed, then so do animals. He's not referring to the Golden Rule, however. Rather, his argument uses humans as a point of comparison in attempts to understand animal rights. In spelling out this comparison, he tells us to imagine a scenario in which the individual's rights must be weighed against the collective interest. In the final Harry Potter film, we see just such a scenario.
So when the time comes, the boy must die?
Yes. Yes. He must die.
You've kept him alive proper moment. You've been raising him like a pig for slaughter.
Don't tell me now that you've grown to care for the boy. Hey. After all this time.
Always.
In this scene, we learn that, due to a series of unfortunate, magical twists, Harry Potter's life is implicated with the villain, and he must die in order for the villain to be defeated. What we learn from a scenario like this is that we as the human onlookers are loath to sacrifice even a single individual human life, even when it is for the greater good, because human beings have a value that is beyond whether they are morally good or useful people. Instead, they are simply valued. The same idea is shown in Dark Knight, when the Joker pits two boats full of people against each other.
Sir, they've stopped their engines.
Right, get on the radio. Tell them we'll come back and pick them up once we dump the scumbags.
Liberty, this is Fury. Come in.
What the heck was that?
Liberty, come in, please. This is Fury. Come in.
Down to the engine room now.
Captain, got 100 barrels down there rigged to blow. In this.
Oh my God.
Looks like some kind of detonator.
Why would they give us the detonator to our own bomb?
Tonight you're all going to be a part of a social experiment. I'm to blow you all sky high.
Liberty, come in. Over. Dead.
Anyone attempts to get off their boat, you all die. Each of you has a remote. Blow up the other boat. At midnight, I blow you all up. If, however, one of you presses the button, I'll let that boat live. So, who's it gonna be? Harvey Dent's most wanted scumbag collection, or the sweet and innocent civilians? You choose. Oh, and you might want to decide quickly, because the people on the other boat may not be quite so noble.
Stay back.
Well, now, who are you to decide? We ought to talk this over at least.
We don't all have to die. Those men had their chance.
We are not going to talk about this.
Why aren't we talking about it?
They're talking over the same exact thing on the other boat. Let's put it to a vote.
I want everybody to put their votes on this piece of paper. If anyone's got pens, pass it along. We need to get these votes in quickly. Come on.
Is 140 against 396-4.
So go ahead, do it.
We're still here. And that means they haven't killed us yet either.
You don't want to die, but you don't know how to take a life. Give it to me. The Indian will kill you and take it anyway.
wants to get their hands dirty. Fine. I'll do it. Those men on that boat, they made their choices. They chose to murder and steal. It doesn't make any sense for us to have to die too.
Give it to me. You can tell them I took it by force. Give it to me, and I'll do what you should have did 10 minutes ago.
Here we go.
While one boat may secure their survival by setting off the bomb on the other boat, in the end, neither can bring themselves to trigger the other boat's bomb. From a utilitarian perspective, it seems plausible that both boats would recognize that if either boat should go, it should be the one with the inmates. And indeed, the passengers of non-criminal citizens discusses this, while the inmates recognize what they believe to be a self-evident truth that they are worth less than those on the other boat. However, the surprise that caught even the Joker off guard in the film is that the boat full of sweet and innocent civilians does not pull the trigger on the boat full of inmates. They do not take advantage of the utilitarian mindset, and instead, once again, somehow find it loath to sacrifice human life. The idea is that humans have inherent value. They are valued by someone, even if they are not moral or even if they are not useful. Put another way, it feels wrong to use human life as simply a means to an end, even if it contributes to the greater good. It is this perception that Tom Regan proposes we apply to animal rights. That is, if humans have rights simply by virtue of being alive, then so do animals. This does not mean that animal rights must never give way to human rights, just as individual human rights may sometimes give way to the collective interest. Rather, it means that a legitimate imperative reason must be proven, while often, in the whaling, cosmetic, farming, pet mill, and other industries, it is not.